racism should read Seven Fallen Feathers because it helped me better understand how systemic racism through underfunding of education has led to the high drug and suicide rates in Indigenous communities. Now, I may not be the type of person you expected to see on this stage talking about education inequality in Indigenous communities. I mean, the true difference between me, the people trying to fix this, and the people sitting on their couch doing nothing, assuming this is all fake, is that I care. We care. People talking and trying to fix this care. And as a social activist who has been fighting the wrongs held against Indigenous people for years, I know that you don't have to have personal experience to know that something is wrong. So just because something isn't happening to you, don't assume it isn't happening.
The seeds of division, of acrimony and distaste, of a lack of cultural awareness and understanding were planted in those early days, and how they were watered and nourished with misunderstanding and ambivalence.
Beautiful quote. Doesn't it make you think? I love how she compares the lack of care to Indigenous problems to watering a plant. And Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. She starts off the story by saying how the white man ruined the lands and lives of Indigenous people, and then goes on to tell the story of the Seven Fallen Feathers, or the murdered and missing Indigenous people. My favorite thing about her writing is that she not only delves into each story with the utmost respect and attention to detail, making sure to tell the story of when they went missing, but also who they were before they went missing. She also tells the story of each and pure racist ideal that led to them going missing, including an underfunded education system. The fact is, education inequality is happening, especially in Indigenous communities. I bet most of you get to wake up, eat breakfast, walk, get a bus, or drive to school, and learn. We as a whole take education for granted. We complain about it. We moan and groan about waking up early. Meanwhile, Indigenous children don't get to complain about it because when they get home, they aren't home. They're at a boarding home. And when they are at school, it's most likely overcrowded and underfunded. Many people don't even know about an issue with education because, as Nikki Kendall said,
When the obstacles you face vary by race and class, then so too do your priorities.
the truth is that many people don't warrant this problem because it's a problem that varies by race and class. Why does the dominant culture have to fight for something when it doesn't affect them? Well, the truth is, you don't. No one has to fight for anything. But while you sit there supporting people who have said things like,
Tear up the treaties. There should have been a 99-year limit when they were originally signed. It is past history. I don't owe these present-day native descendants anything. Any Aboriginals alive at the time of Confederation are dead. And they came here from somewhere else, too. Asia, if you study genetics. So they don't own North America or Canada. No more special rights or privileges or free rides for anyone. We are all equal and have to work, pay taxes, and support ourselves. Natives continue to prove they cannot manage the money and benefits they are given and live productive and healthy lives. Living like the rest of us would teach them accountability and responsibility.
I'm up here thinking, who gave this guy Twitter? Ever heard of racism? How about more specifically, systemic racism? A government that is supposed to be equal is making Indigenous children live with an underfunded education, providing consistently lower levels of support. Underfunded is quite a common word in this speech and book. And the fact is that this problem is much too big for just the word underfunded. Yes, the schools are being given much less funding than needed, but all that it leads to needs to be in focus as well. Now, Madua does run many elementary schools that have been described as subpar. How is a school supposed to run if not given any funding? Indigenous children are not being given an equal opportunity to education. They're not given enough teachers, nor are they given enough individualized attention. And the irony in it all is that this is described as subpar. Children, our future, being left in the dust by the Canadian government is simply subpar. Often a failure to have a proper education system leads to a loss of hope. Because what fun is school if everything is underfunded and you feel unimportant? A study done in 1994 in Chicago took a population of adults and asked them about their school experience. It showed that dropping out of school doubles your chance of becoming a heroin addict. The truth is, it's not that the fact that Indigenous people can't be trusted with the many privileges they've been given. It's the fact that these privileges meant to help them hurt. The Canadian government has never funded schools in Indigenous communities as much as they funded schools in predominantly white neighborhoods. Did you know that Canada is home to one of the suicide capitals of the world? It's called Pekanjicum in northwestern Ontario. In an article written about the place, it's described as being constantly haunted by the specter of suicide. It also brings attention to how only 2 students graduated from high school last year. It's ridden with high school dropouts and drug users. And this article heavily links it with a lack of funding for education and housing. The article also quotes that education is by far the most effective antidote to suicide. But they had to send their students to graffiti-covered mobile homes. And the students had to miss a total of 30 days of school because, as the principal quoted, water deaths. And all this happened under the nose of a leader they didn't vote for. Yes, the amazing Stephen Harper, the same man who passed a bill stating that no woman should wear a niqab or a hijab while becoming a citizen of Canada, claiming that no Canadian should be hiding who they truly are. Now, in the book, a man called Ivan thinks about all that's happened to Indigenous people, including the massive amounts of sexual assault and the devastating effects of residential schools. And Alvin thought about all this as he stared into Stephen Harper's face, living large on the screen in front of him. Stephen Harper never did anything to help funding for education. In fact, he agreed with giving them less funding. And they got to look at his smiling face on billboards. All while his selfish choices raked Indigenous communities with debt and poverty. Many parents learned to not trust the promise of good schooling from the Canadian government after the horrid affair that was residential schools. How are you meant to trust a system that so heavily betrayed you and your ancestors in the past? How are parents meant to just send their children away to get a proper education when they were forcefully taken away to get a proper education? And sure, some schools are located on reservations.
On June 1st, 2010, the 15-year-old girl who had moved out of her community to go to high school died of her injuries from a tragic car accident.
Parents have to deal with sending their children away when they know that the government and the community they are being sent to will not take care of them. A bright girl with a future left ahead of her left her community to get a good education and died soon after, not being able to witness that a couple months later, a school would be built on her reservation.
Northern First Nation families are faced with the horrific choice of either sending their children to high school in a community that cannot guarantee their safety or keeping them at home and hoping distance education will be enough. Families are still being told, more than 20 years after the last residential school was shut down, that they must surrender their children for them to gain an education.
More than 20 years later, a government claiming to help them is forcing the survivors of residential schools to send their own children away in order to receive a proper education, which Tulega describes as a clear example of control and racism from the Canadian government. The fact is that a lack of funding in Indigenous communities clearly leads to a lack of hope for a future. No one wants to live in a world where you learn from a young age that you'll never get as far as the rich white kid because you were never given the chance of equal opportunity. So many young kids are either escaping from their problems with drugs and alcohol or killing themselves at ages as young as 10 years old. So what's the take from all this? Is the Canadian government evil? No, but they are lazy, especially when it comes to Indigenous education funding. So what do I want you to do? What I can say is, don't be an idiot. And don't doubt the obvious effects of systemic racism like this guy over here. Be a fighter. Write letters. Donate money. Don't assume Canada is perfect. And don't ever ignore the people fighting for an equal opportunity to education. And if you ever hear a person say that the drug usage, suicide, and missing persons rate in Indigenous community is not caused by the systemic racism shown by the Canadian government, especially through a lack of funding for education, give them this book. Show them this TED Talk. That's it.